Create the Jamaica Information Service, our discussion program coming to you live on Facebook. I'm your host, Vaughn Davis. Thank you to everyone joining us wherever you are around the world. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your eyes. And like how we have your attention, do us a favor, no man. The same favor we ask everybody all the time when they tune in. Share this video with a friend or two or 10,000 so we can have a very lively discussion. And don't forget to participate with your questions and your comments so we can have a very lively show this afternoon. Now, we're going to be talking about something heavy today, you know what I mean? So I hope you can really listen along, participate, and really follow along. And hopefully today's show will have a meaningful impact on those of you who do tune in. Now, research indicates that as much as 12% of Jamaican women have been physically forced to have sex at some point in their lifetimes. I don't have to tell you that out of a population of around 3 million people, that's a lot of women. That means there are a lot of women carrying around the scars and hurt translation of their bodies. For me, the immediate question when I hear of this information is, how can I help? How can we all help victims to recover and move forward? But what I'm learning lately is that sometimes it's best to quiet your knee-jerk reaction and get some proper advice and guidance before you run out thinking that you're helping, and then you realize you're only really doing little or nothing or making a very small impact. With that in mind, we have as our guest today someone who is working on the front lines trying to help sexual abuse victims to see how we can learn to help from an educated place. We have in studio today founder and director of Pursuit International Foundation, Miss Stacy Ann Smith. Welcome, Stacy. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Vaughn. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here for this very important conversation. As a woman, yes, but also a person working with women who have experienced this and see the ripple effects of it. I'm glad to be here to be a part of the discussion.
No, I was going to do my intro with a little bit more on Pursuit International, but I found when I was doing research on the website, I found that the story itself around how the foundation got started is interesting enough for you to share it all your own. So I want you to do that for me. Give me a little bit of the backstory of Pursuit International. Tell me about it. How did that come to be?
Thanks for asking. A few years ago, around 2017, just waiting to go to an event with some friends, I decided to use the time to read up on some articles that I wanted to catch up on. I was a part of a writing community that was based in Australia, so I was catching up on some of the articles. One that stood out to me was called Sex Tourism or Christmas Sex, something of that nature. And I was like, I was intrigued because it really was a religious magazine. So I was like, okay, this is going to be very interesting. And what I found out was that there was a high prevalence of sex tourism in Southeast Asia. And so I decided to leave my job, leave Jamaica, and go to Asia to go and support as a therapist. Also, I am a Christian, so I wanted to get in support of being able to help them. And so I spent 9 months working in brothels, on the side of the street with sexually exploited women or women who were being trafficked, and also with an agency that worked to help restore these women. And after those 9 months, when I came back home, I was like, I need to do something about it. Initially, I thought, like many people, let me fly to a first world country and join some other established organization. Like, yeah, man, like you do it and just come help. And I was challenged to do more work in my own country. And I began researching, got to know about organizations like National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons and seeing the prostitutes on the road in Jamaica. And I was like, all right, you know what? Instead of me flying out and helping some other country, let me reinforce helping my own country and helping my own women, and hopefully eventually can spread to other places. And so Pursuit started, launched on my birthday, and have been going ever since.
All right, so when exactly did you get started? Basically, I guess the question is, how long has Pursuit International been working in Jamaica now?
Since 2018, summer of 2018 is our first street outreach. Before the pandemic, we were going out every 2 weeks in the Kingston area to engage with and provide support to commercial sex workers, because we found in the research that many of the women who are in the sex tourism have been abused prior, and or are at risk of being trafficked. So we thought if we could find ways to support them, match them to resources, it would reduce vulnerability. We also do awareness in schools, in summer camps, in businesses, where we talk about and help to prevent exploitation by raising awareness about mostly human trafficking, but also how to protect yourself from being a vulnerable person who's being trafficked.
Now, I want to circle back to some of those interesting issues that you raised in terms of providing direct assistance to commercial sex workers, because, you know, naturally that in itself might divide opinion depending on who you ask. But I guess from your vantage point, what is based on the issue of sexual violence or sexual abuse in Jamaica? What is it that you wish more people knew about the subject in Jamaica? What do you wish more persons brought to the discussions around it so that would better inform how they would see it, how they would be able to provide help, and I guess how they look at victims and so on and so forth?
Definitely. So when you look at the emotional effects of being assaulted sexually and the violence from domestic abuse, what you realize is the long-term effects cause such significant damage that it affects everything from persons being able to have healthy relationships with friends, with their lovers. It also affects their self-esteem and their self-image. And so I'm going to say all for right now, all the women who I have spoken with who are working on the street sexually abused as a child. Okay. Every single one of them. And I think if we understood that first, we would respond differently. Even if you're engaging with someone who isn't a commercial sex worker, your colleague, your boss, your friend, your person at church, that the effects of domestic violence and any sort of violence against a woman right now, the effects are so long reaching and so far reaching that it affects even them being able to trust people around them. And so when you're engaging with them, understanding that them being irritable, them being withdrawn, them being hyper vigilant about getting close to people, especially men, becomes more understandable. It's not just miserable, there's something else. It's not just, angry. There's something behind that. If you took the time to understand that, you respond differently.
No, I guess as far as sexual violence, or well, again, getting tongue twisted with all because there are so many labels and things that they apply to the situation in many cases. Now, how do you, I guess most persons would want to know, as I said, from the point of view of how you help. To begin with, I guess one of the things that you have to be able to do is to help to identify a person who may be a victim. So how do you how can you help persons to understand that concept? How do you try to find ways to identify a person, it's particularly children, because unfortunately, as you just mentioned, in many cases, not necessarily this is a judgment, but many of the young ladies who are find themselves as commercial sex workers would have experienced abuse or some kind of violation when they were young. And so in many cases, what that would mean is that, they would have been exhibiting some signs, perhaps some kind of that if maybe somebody who would have caught, they would have been able to provide them with some kind of intervention at a younger age. This is just me being idealistic. I know that's how it's on. I heard it as it was coming out my mouth, but it's still good to raise that as an issue all the same. So talk to me about being able to identify somebody who may be going through this kind of situation.
That's a good question. I don't think, just a caveat, I don't think you're being idealistic. It's part of what drives what we do. The support we provide to women helps them to be able to see there is another way. There is something else that they can do. So in thinking about how to identify a victim who is presently being abused or might have some trauma, it's that when the person is presently being abused. So you want to look at things like the physical first. Are there any signs or markings that are frequent, and the response or the excuses or the reasons just sound sketch, like we usually hear the one about falling down the steps, right. But there are others that you hear that by being around the person, a child or a woman, that these examples or reasons are not adding up, or it's happening too often, these bruises on the person. If you're talking about emotional signs, you're looking at persons who are very withdrawn, who are constantly making up excuses for the person who is possibly the one causing the abuse. We're talking about persons who, when they are around you in social gatherings, if it's a wife or a girlfriend, she can't talk for herself very much, or she's always excusing what he's doing. I find in the research that persons who are in abusive relationships with adults or teens, the abuser tends to try to isolate them, not want them to have time with their friends, overly jealous. And if you're looking at things like financially, they can't control their money. If it's an older person, if it's a child, you're thinking about, the neglect of they look when they come to school, which is kind of harder now in the pandemic, I know. But it are these children who are unaccounted for. You do a home visit. How does the child look? Where does the child sleep? How are they in class? Are they very soft-spoken, very withdrawn? Or the other side, easily irritable as a teenager, because that could be signs of depression, it could be signs of anxiety, which are also effects emotionally of abuse.
Now,
And just to kind of add, in the space that we are in as a woman, all of these things start being present and having a conversation. So I don't know about the stories I know until we went out there and sit on the roadside beside them while I'm drinking and smoking with no expectations, but I want to hear his story.
No, but that's actually where I was headed next. Now, based on your experience, I guess sitting with some of these persons and these different women and I guess different victims. Let's just use that word. What have you learned, or have you been able to see persons who have experienced this kind of trauma and see them move in I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, what does it look like when a person receives help and is able to move forward? How do you help them to process the trauma, and what does that look like, and what are some, I guess, when they're moving in the right direction, what does that look like? Because I guess in my mind, there's no such thing as as a person has had a problem and then you just come to them and just tell them two things in them ears and then all of a sudden they're good now. They're perfectly functional members of society and they can just move on. And so how does that process work? And when the person is improving and so on, what does that look like? Because it's important, I think, to make persons appreciate that it's a process. And so it will not look like, the person will not look like the finished article after two interventions, so to speak. You know what I mean?
I would start with what was said to us in our first training. We had a group called Street Passers come and speak with us, and the teacher said to us, for any kind of significant change to happen in a space or community, it takes about 15 years.
15
and
years.
I remember being there on my first day before we even launched, thinking, 15 years on the road, wow, this is going to be a long haul. And I can tell you, I'll use one of our ladies as an example. We have a young lady who we met on the first day of doing our street outreach, and she immediately took a liking to about one or two of our volunteers, and a friendship was formed. Every 2 weeks when we were out there, we spent a long time talking with her. And then what happened from that point is now meeting with her outside of the space, meeting up with her and providing support in terms of emotional, spiritual, constant conversation. And then we can intervene. When the pandemic started, we helped her stock her shop that she started. When that didn't work out, we helped her to get a fridge so she could start doing her chicken business. And we couldn't give up when every time each thing didn't work out. And here we are, 3 years later, she's now a security guard. Each thing failed, it was try something, it didn't work. We tried something, it didn't work. Just kept being there, kept being present, kept supporting, kept not judging. When we go back on the road and we see her again, we don't think, how come you back out here? We go, hey, how are you? How are things? There is no judgment. There's a continuous support that even if tomorrow I go on the road again and I see her, I'm not going to judge. I know it took a lot to be here, so I'm going to now continue constant conversation or frequent conversation, frequent support, and not judging when a person falls back. So long story short, what it takes is commitment. It takes not judging at all, even when you think the person is going back to the situation, even though they told you they won't go back again. And it's not leaving them when they're down, but staying all the way through. As a therapist, I can tell you, I have clients that I see that I will go through a few months with them, and then they come back again a year later. And it's not what I do is consistently support all the way to the end. All of us are works in progress.
Right. Right. And I think it's just important to reinforce that message because, I mean, as a sidebar note, and I'm sure you understand as well, they say that, victims of domestic abuse are women in situations like that. It takes at least 7 attempts to leave before they're able to successfully complete and move away from their abuser or something like that. And so you can just appreciate that in the kind of trauma that are in dealing with that kind of trauma, it's not necessarily easy to, because in many cases maybe the trauma or the emotional place, you're used to it. You're used to being or operating in that space. So it's easy that maybe even, as weird as it might sound, it might be a comfort zone. And so it's easy to just go back there as opposed to try something new and different and possibly fail at it.
And I can give you a term that we use in psychology called learned helplessness. So what it is that is what that concept is describing is when a person who has been exposed to continuous aversive stimuli and every attempt to come out doesn't work, then they quit. They stop trying. So they probably tried the first time, it didn't work out, whether they tried with a restraining order or they spoke to a friend or they just left, but they ended up back in, or they tried to leave and the person found a way to get them back in the situation. Enough times of trying to get out of something with no success, you begin to think you'll never be able to get up. That's what they call it in psychology, learned helplessness. And you also think about the fact that abusers use certain tactics to break down a victim. They don't just start hitting you on the first day. It's small, little by little, breaking down the resolve of their victim until they feel like they have nothing else and everything this person says about them is who they really are. They call it a thing called Pimp 101. I went to a training where the pimp talked, the document that it was passing around pimps. Pimps are persons who prostitute women. In this document that was written up by some pimp, it outlined, be nice and take it back. Make them feel supported because nobody else cares about them, then take it back. Like outline step by step how to break a woman until she's so reliant on you that she's unwilling to leave even when you're treating her terribly.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would like you. Could we stay on that for a little bit more? Because I don't think.
Sure.
I think there are many persons who might be experiencing something like that, but they might not be able to put a name to it or put a label to it. So it's very important. So what does that even look like? I would imagine even young girls who are in relationships now, who might just be starting out and dating and things like that, might be experiencing things like this. So I want you to reinforce, particularly for our young ladies, who might not necessarily